That'll be about $3.50.
For a black coffee? You've got to be kidding me.
I'm sorry, but corporate doesn't like us calling it that anymore. It's pure coffee now.
Why can't I call it a black coffee?
I really wish you hadn't asked that. Linda, I'm gonna need you to put that coffee on hold. Sorry, it's store policy. We have to have a racial sensitivity conversation with you now before you can be served your drink.
This is silly. Can I have my coffee now?
Have you considered a latte? Cream and dark roasted beans. Diversity is our strength. Please, don't resist. I really have to do this, otherwise I lose my job. And frankly, considering my dad, I'll likely have to starve myself again, but I'll look in great shape for my interviews.
Okay, I don't want you to get in trouble. Let's get it over with.
Okay, so with you, we would probably need to talk about microaggressions. Why do you feel the need to call it black coffee?
To indicate to you that I didn't want anything in it.
So if I had added sugar, like an obscene amount of sugar, would it still be your order?
No, like I said, I don't want anything in it. What is this, a McDonald's?
No, my point is that pure coffee is more accurate, wouldn't you say? And it's not using racially charged language.
Are you really being serious right now? Am I being punked? Like, how is this your store policy? I totally agree with you that we should try to do no unintentional harm with our language, but telling me that I can't say black coffee is a bit over the top, don't you think?
Look, maybe you're not a racist, really. I just needed a segue. See, corporate wants us to start a conversation about race.
While keeping people from their coffee?
We tried giving them the coffee first in focus groups, but they either left or threw it at us. This way, there are fewer burns all around. So I'm just gonna get into it, okay? We're all born a little bit racist, and we have to think about that, you know? Start the conversation.
Okay, I get the desire to help, I really do, but this seems like the worst way to do it. First of all, I just want my coffee, and at this point, you're just antagonizing me. But what we really need to be talking about is classism. Racist politicians haven't sold their policies on overtly racist themes since the Civil Rights Act. Now they always hide their biases behind classism, and we really don't talk about that.
We have to be aware of our flaws in order to be able to change them. If you aren't willing to change those things, you end up committing microaggressions, like racially charged language.
This is what I mean though. Assuming that any racially charged word in any context is a sign that we're all a little bit racist is exactly how you get most people to quit listening to you. What you're talking about is in-group bias. In-group bias is formed based on those you consider to be a part of your social group. People you like and admire. You're far more likely to view them and their beliefs favorably. Now I can't ignore that people's social groups often closely reflect their race, and that gives them inherent bias against other races, but to say that all in-group bias is actually just racism misses the broader implications.
What do you mean?
Well, we hear about people having filter bubbles, echo chambers, and such more nowadays, right? Those can be likened to in-groups. This store seems pretty racially diverse in its hiring, so maybe, thanks to all these people of color factoring in so heavily into your in-group, you don't have many racial biases. But maybe what you do have in common is class. And maybe this causes you to hate the 1% in the owner class. Or maybe just the owner of this franchise.
See, diversity works.
The problem is though, that kind of division can happen in anything, and it seems to be able to happen even faster now. That's why it's gotten to the point in American politics that looking at the rhetoric that people use to talk about each other, you'd think we had a communist party and a fascist party. It affects every part of our interactions with others, and it's becoming more polarizing by the year. And I think that reducing it down to racism makes this natural inclination so much harder to talk about. At least in part because you're turning your audience off right off the bat.
Well, what about systemic racism? Slavery and Jim Crow still have their effects today.
The Southern Democrats did awful things in the name of prejudice, but the modern Republican accomplishes much the same goal by employing class the same way that the Dixiecrats employed race. To quote Lee Atwater,
I'm afraid I can't allow that.
fine, but you know what I'm getting at. The whole idea that a lot of these things that are so abstract is to be purely economic, as to hurt their intended targets as bad as Jim Crow by locking them in the same state of perpetual poverty. A law doesn't have to seem racist to have a clear racial effect, and we have a lot of those, especially in our criminal justice system. But since 2013, they've also been attacking the right to vote on racial lines as well, even though no one's passing laws that say things should be harder for black people or minorities anymore. Today they're attacking the lower class because that's where most of the non-whites are. I'm not saying that systemic racism isn't a problem and that it isn't something we should talk about. It is, and we should. But the social right that has evolved post-1964 world doesn't really see the world on racial lines anymore.
You think the right is colorblind?
I think they are for the most part. Some of them are mustache-twistingly racist, just like the ones who wrote NC's voter ID laws. And most of the time, they don't openly base their laws on racial data. They use class as a proxy for race, attacking the social safety nets, adding small costs to voting, including taking a poor person's valuable time. I mean, when you're working 3 jobs just to make it, going to the DMV for a few hours to get a new ID is a cost that, even if the ID were free, you likely can't afford.
Oh, go right ahead. It's not like I need to get to work or anything.
The problem is that often we let them hide behind classism, as if we tacitly accept it. But we attack them on the lines of race, even when racial motives aren't so clear. And they can always say something like, "It's not racist, it affects more white people." They attack the poor without acknowledging the reasons many of them became poor, and ignore why our system is built to continuously perpetuate that idea and to move money to the top of the pyramid. And a side effect of that is that blacks get hurt much worse than others.
Come on, I told you about quoting Lee Atwater in here. I let it slide the first time, but that was practically word for word.
Okay. My point is that most people who aren't thinking about or aware of systemic racism, well, that's where most people are at in this country. They don't see themselves as intentionally racist. Maybe they've never thought of class and racial implications of mandatory minimum sentencing, cutting welfare programs, voter ID laws, and maybe they wouldn't champion them so hardly if they understood. But we can't have that conversation at all without holding their coffee hostage, at least. If our response is to call them racist and make them want to shrink back into their comfortable in-groups, it says that that's okay. We need to have the conversation where they are, at their level of understanding, especially if we plan to interrogate strangers who just want their coffee. And right now, these crypto racists are fighting a war against class, and we have to be class conscious enough to be able to have that conversation without just jumping to call every microaggression racist. But even while I think that it would be a more rhetorically appropriate place to be having this conversation in this decade or so, your company would never let you talk about class issues. No big group would. They'd rather have you talk about race because it keeps their suppression of labor in effect. If you started the conversation about class here, you might think about forming a union, and how would corporate feel about that?
We charge enough for bean water that they ought to be able to pay us better.
Exactly. Now you're thinking, because of the way the system was designed to reinforce oppression of the previously oppressed or the lower classes, long-term racist outcomes are easy. Just move minorities into the lower class once and our system will keep them there perpetually. The only way out is by removing that system, or pulling them all out of poverty without condition. Give everyone a fair start and at least enough capital to invest in their own futures instead of being in a constantly dependent state of wage slavery.
So you're saying that without poverty, there would be no reason to talk about racism?
No, we'll still have to talk about it afterwards because it's kind of just a part of us. We need to be exposed to real diversity, to break out of easier, comfortable thought bubbles every now and then. And it's not just a matter of race, but of religion, culture, state, political ideology, philosophy, sex, and gender. Right now, they justify using the groups that have been traditionally oppressed down with classism and the false notion of capitalism, and even more laughably, American capitalism, and this idea that it's a meritocracy and not a system that was at its core designed to be bought and sold through capital.
You know, I think we mix a lot of things up with money in this country. They say money is speech, and from what you said, it sounds like money is merit as well. Money is power. Fine, I agree. Maybe we really should be talking about class. Linda, can you...
Now this dude's trying to sell this guy on redistribution of wealth. I can't fucking believe it. Socialism is the only cure for racism, right? I guess capitalism is racist. Am I right, comrade? How about we redistribute this motherfucking coffee and...
I swear to fuck, I do not get paid enough to deal with this shit. Sir, I'm just trying to keep my job here. If you have a problem, you're welcome to tell corporate it was a bad idea.
How about Yelp?
I hate you with a passion.
It's not so much that capitalism is inherently racist. It's more of a progressive pyramid scheme designed to encourage intergenerational wealth that would be self-perpetuating. It's ultimately designed to rip everyone off in the end, except for the slimmest margin at the top. But as for why it seems to target minorities first and most viciously, it's because we trained it to by giving them unequal starting access to capital. Ending poverty in this country would completely reset that. I'm not saying that socialism is the only way out of here, but it is one. We can't lie to ourselves and pretend that the ideas of incentivizing investment over labor won't do anything but create an investor class that gets wealth by virtue of being wealthy from birth and making their money work for them. Trying to make a system designed with that idea at its core do anything but channel money to the top and reinforce the perpetual discrimination of anyone who ever falls economically or is made to fall by some sort of outgrouping, othering, or other way to discriminate that humanity comes up with in the next few decades.
Is a purely Sisyphean task.
Come on. You're two white people talking like you've got this all figured out when you've never really lived any life other than the white one. I really hate this term, but this whole discussion is mired in white privilege.
Oh shit, that was on the PowerPoint. I was supposed to mention white privilege.
Buddy, I just want my coffee and for this guy to be able to make a living. But it's not his fault that he can't organize and take collective action against a policy like this. But thank you for bringing up white privilege. I'll handle this one, so just go make me a warm cup of coffee. First of all, there are two types of white privilege we should talk about. Like how employers are far more likely to pick a white name over an ethnic sounding one. Even if that's not intentionally racist, it's still pretty bad, and that's just the first type.
Oh god, now there's two types of white privilege? I am so done with this already. Just be glad you own all the coffee places in town or you'd lose my business right now. Look, I own a business myself, and I have an idea on why this might be happening. Poor people don't tend to be well educated, and they also tend to have longer criminal records. They just make bad employees, so when I see Tyrone, or for that matter, Cletus, on a resume, I tend to move on to the next one. That's not white privilege, it's just practical.
See, he's using class justification to defend what you might call a racist position.
It's not racist, it doesn't work out so well for Cletus either.
Great, it's racism with a wider net. Lovely.
Oh, give him his coffee already. I'm not going to say a word to Tom about this, I promise. You did your best.
Excuse me, Linda, did you just call me him? I gave you my pronouns when I came in. I remember thinking that was weird that you asked, considering that you can't ever spell my name right when I come in here.
I'm sorry. Your Majesty.
That's more like it, Linda. Have fun starting that conversation.
Alright, you know what to do by now. It's YouTube. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the links in the description.